Hi, everybody. Very sorry that I was unable to get Facebook video started, but every single time I get on Facebook and try to do a video live, they change everything. And this time it looks like they're not allowing just a standard video to be uploaded, but it has, or be live, but they want you to have like a pre-recorded thing, which is what I'm doing now. So I am recording Zoom. I'm hoping that this one is working. And then after I'm finished, I'm going to be uploading this, and then you can watch it under what should have been a Facebook Live. So I had a lot of questions, and I'm going to answer those questions. And I'm going to talk a little bit in general, because we have so many new members, and I'm sure that many of you have a lot of questions. And so this would have been a good way to participate together, but I guess that was all meant to be. So let me talk. First, I would like to cover the subjects that I mentioned that I was going to be discussing about, which would be nutrients in our body, the chemical connections with vitamin D3, A, cholesterol, and sun tanning. And then whether you're gaining weight or not, and why that is, and what to do about it. And then we had two questions, and one of them was about ulcerative colitis, and the other about hemiplegic migraines. So I'm going to cover these two as well. So nutrients in our body. Well, we know a lot about nutrients, right? I mean, the whole group is about nutrients. So we talk about macros all the time, and we know that we have three macros: protein, carb, fat. That's not really what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is the understanding of what each of these do within our system, how they work, and how they can't work. So, for example, let's talk about carbohydrates and fat. And I'm combining these two for a single reason, is that both of these are fuels. Now, carbohydrate is only fuel. Under no condition does it participate in anything, any activity other than a fuel. And a fuel means basically is to create energy for your body to run on. And the energy is created by mitochondria, which are little bacteria-like organelles within our cells. Each cell has thousands, some of them have millions of mitochondria, and they're each churning out ATP. I'm sure you've heard the word ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is the currency of energy. And so basically, this currency of energy is really a form of heat. And so ATP is a form of heat. And so what mitochondria create in this ATP is heat. But how does it create it, and what does it do? And how does what we eat go into the mitochondria? And how does that become the energy, or us? How does it become my skin, my eyes, my nose, my liver, kidney, and a new baby? And so I think this is very important to be able to relate to this, because it's a very difficult topic. And I would say that 99.999% of the population, even when you're talking about doctors or scientists, may not fully understand how this actually works. And so let me start with looking at these macronutrients from the perspective of the mitochondria, because you're not eating for yourself. In other words, when you eat, say, a steak, it's not like the steak is moving through your body and then it remains a steak for the sake of the steak, right? I mean, the steak is going to convert into you somehow. And so how does it convert into you? And I talk a lot about protein synthesis. How does that connect into all these things? And how does, for example, carbohydrates, which convert to glucose, and meat that converts, that is going to be synthesized to protein, how does that happen? Why are these differences showing up, and how does it connect to us? And so in this context, if you're looking at it, we have to look only at the mitochondria, because when you're eating, say you eat an apple, or you eat a steak, or you eat a stick of butter, okay? So it's three different macronutrients that I've just listed. The steak would be the protein, the apple would be the carbohydrate, and the stick of butter would be the fat. So how do these end up working? Well, in our body, our organs, very specifically the stomach, of course, digest everything, which is breaking it down with acid, and it converts it into a substance that is called chyme. And this chyme is a if you've ever vomited anything, you know, it's a liquid mix of something that stinks and is really bad tasting, but it's liquid. And it's completely different in color and shape and texture from what you're familiar with. And that's because the acids denature the amino acids in the protein, break up some of the carbohydrates, and of course start working with the fat. Some of the fats, like the small chain, the short chain fatty acids, which are the shortest chain ketone bodies, they get to be absorbed from the stomach into the body. But the other fats, the longer fats, will continue down through the intestine, from the stomach to the intestines. But so in the stomach, the goal is to break everything down into its molecular size. So what is a molecular size? So some of you may or may not have taken chemistry or physics in your education. It's really difficult to comprehend, but everything that you're looking at is made up of tiny particles, which are molecules. And within molecules, we have, of course, atoms, and within atoms, we have electrons and positrons. These are charges, so electrical charges. And so what we're talking about is that everything that exists around us is basically an electrical charge of some sort, okay? And so elements that you see as existing don't really exist per se. They are connected by these electrical forces into units that you can see. But in our body, with the help of our acid and all kinds of enzymes and all kinds of body functions that we have, we break everything down into the molecular and atomic parts. And when I'm referring to the electrical charges within, for example, an atom, I'm talking about the differences in the positive and negative charges. So for example, looking at water, you're drinking water, and the only reason you can see water is because individual water molecules are connected. And they can be connected because there's a little bit of electrical potential, both in the positive and negative side of water, and it's called dipolar. And so water is made up of hydrogen and oxygen, right? And as a result of that, when so many molecules, water molecules of hydrogen and oxygen are connected, then you can see a body of water molecules, which is what you see as water, right? If there was no electrical difference between water molecules, they would not stick together, they would not bond, because it's the electrical charge that bonds these molecules together. So the same goes for all the foods you eat. So when you eat a steak, the steak itself is made up of hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon. I think I may be forgetting something. Oh, oxygen. So basically it's made up of 5 elements. There are 2 amino acids that have sulfur as well, but I'm not talking about them. So let's talk about just a simple amino acid, a simple piece of protein that doesn't have right now those amino acids in them. So when you're looking at what the meat is that you're eating, you're basically eating 5 elements in molecular form connected into certain shapes and forms. So as I said, in a meat, we will have 5. We will have carbon, which is basically representing that it is an organic material. So anything that is organic is going to have carbon. Nitrogen is what makes meat meat. Then we also have, of course, the water, which is hydrogen and oxygen. And forgetting carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, and oxygen. I'm forgetting something. Anyway, so we have 5 elements within when we're talking about protein. When we're talking about fat, what do we have? In fat, we have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Yep, that's it. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, okay? So we are basically talking about 3 elements in fat. What do we have in glucose? Glucose, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. What do we have in fructose? Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. What do we have, for example, in a steak? In a steak, you're going to have, of course, you're going to have carbohydrates because of the glycogen. So you're going to have carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. You're going to have fat, of course, because every single cell has a fat membrane that surrounds it. So any kind of meat that you eat is going to have fat because the cells themselves are made of fat on the outside, and inside too there is fat in them. So there's going to be, of course, what is the fat made from? The cell made from protein and fat is made from carbohydrates, oxygen, and hydrogen. And animal product carbohydrates made from carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, nitrogen, and in some cases the sulfate. So when you're looking at it, there's no difference between these products. Basically, all of them have three main ingredients: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And then in protein, you also add nitrogen. But otherwise, there's no difference between fat and carbohydrates or glucose. There's zero difference. The elemental molecular ingredients are exactly the same. Yet if you're looking at sugar, and which is a crystalline product or maybe a gel, versus looking at fat, you're going to see completely different textures. So why is that? And we also know that within fat, we have many different kinds of fats, and within sugar, we have different kinds of sugar like fructose, glucose, lactose, galactose, whatever. We have a lot of different things. But so why do they differ if they're all made up of the same thing? And the difference is how the molecular structure itself is set up, whether the certain atom is here or there, is it turned this way or that way? So there's the angular differences, and also the difference may be in the number. Like in a glucose molecule, there's going to be 6 carbon molecules, for example, but in meat, they may be different, as well as in fat, they will be different. And so, but in our stomach, everything that we just ate will break down into this atomic soup. But each of these molecules will have different atomic structures, and so they retain some semblance of what it is, but not fully. They're really breaking down into what the chemical actually is. So it turns into chemicals. So when you eat meat, or when you eat an apple, or you eat a stick of butter, in terms of the chemical makeup, it's nearly identical. But how your body reacts to it differs because of how and what your body has to do to change the structures into such a way that each will do different things under different conditions. And this different condition is very important. So if, for example, you eat a very large apple, say a really big apple like that, and it will have maybe 30 carb grams, that means for your body that your mitochondria in each of your cells is going to be fed the nutrition from what you ate in the apple. So the apple is going to be broken down into carbohydrates in your stomach. The carbohydrates is going to separate into glucose and fructose. The fructose is going to go left, the glucose is going to go right, and the glucose itself is going to be further processed in a variety of ways. And these are like going to pyruvate, then it's going to be becoming after several steps, a coenzyme, an acetyl coenzyme, which can then go into the mitochondria. Now, what is fat going to convert into to go into the mitochondria? Acetyl coenzyme. What is protein going to convert if you ate too little or too much protein and some of it is used for energy? What is that going to convert to get into mitochondria? Acetyl coenzyme. So your mitochondria couldn't care less what you're eating. It always gets the exact same thing, acetyl coenzyme, because that's the only element that it can use to create energy, ATP, which then you can use for whatever fuel your body needs to do, maybe the support of a protein synthesis, maybe the creation of DNA, maybe the replacement of a cell, or maybe running around the block, or just to have your heart beating or breathing, or me recording this lecture for you. And so the mitochondria always get the same thing. But what makes these nutrients different is the conversion process to go from the carbohydrate or from the amino acid or from the fat into the mitochondria, to be able to convert it so that it can go into the mitochondria as fuel. And this is where the problem is. This is why carbohydrates are substandard relative to, for example, fat, even though both will convert to acetyl coenzyme the same way. Some fats can go straight directly into the mitochondria without conversion, such as the short and medium chain of fatty acids, which are the ketone products. Those don't even need to be converted. They can just go straight into the mitochondria, but the other ones have to be converted. But the conversion process itself, when you're converting glucose into acetyl coenzyme, the steps that you have to go through create a lot of heat. And the heat itself is not any different from, think of your car. If you have a car and you drive it, what happens if your car overheats? Then you can't run the car. You have to stop and you have to wait, and you have to change the coolant maybe until the engine cools enough so that you can start the engine again. So when you eat a lot of glucose, carbohydrates that convert to glucose and move into the mitochondria as energy, you literally are slowing the mitochondria because there's so much heat created in the process of creating the acetyl coenzyme for the mitochondria from glucose, that this particular heat itself is just stopping the mitochondria from being able to work. It can't work under such heated conditions. And so at some point, the mitochondria is going to say, I can't take any more, rest. And this presents itself in a variety of ways. One way is that if you're familiar or remember what it was like to eat the standard American diet, the SAD diet, or eating a plant-based diet, a very high in carbohydrate diet, then after eating a big meal, you needed to take a nap. This is why most people around the world need a nap after eating. It's because the mitochondria says, I can't handle this much glucose. That's the reason. There are other problems with it, and that has something to do with the oxides that are created, because to convert glucose into acetyl coenzyme, there's a lot of oxidation happening, and oxidative damages and reactive oxygen species are created. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that as well, because it's connecting to autoimmune diseases that I'm going to talk about at the end, is that our immune system is a very clever system, and it understands that most of the functions in our body use high levels of oxygen, but pathogens that enter our system, be it viruses or bacteria, are usually anaerobic. Anaerobic means is that they can't survive or don't do so well surviving in an area high in oxygen. And so oxygen is highly explosive. You know that, I'm sure, that's why you can't even take a can of oxygen up on an airplane for flying, because it can explode. It's an explosive substance. It's very flammable. And in fact, the increased level of oxygen can create serious problems even for us around Earth. And so oxygen can be used as a weapon. And so our immune system is using oxygen to literally kill or get rid of viral or bacterial or any kind of parasitic elements. But of course, it's using it as a targeted oxygen bomb. I call it an oxygen bomb. It's not really a bomb. It's just releasing an oxygen on the particular element, which then destroys that element. But the oxygen itself is still going to be there. And because it is oxidized, meaning the thing that the oxygen was attached to has become oxidized, think of this as rust. As you're looking at, for example, iron, and you put it in a high oxygen moist environment, which is what our body is, it's going to turn to rust. And that is an oxidized iron. And so when you are killing a bacteria with an oxygen molecule, that bacteria is going to be oxidized. And so there is going to be a lot of oxidative damage. And not only is the bacteria going to be oxidized, but potentially other things will also be oxidized in our body. Like if you don't have enough or any bacteria in your system or viral infections in your system, and you have too much oxygen like this that is created by all this heat, the body won't be able to get rid of it. and it's going to cause inflammation. So here's your oxidative damage that is generated, and hence we need some antioxidants. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about coming out of nutrients. I wanted to talk about the oxidative damage as well, but just to close up the nutrient argument. So when you're eating food, think of the food as just molecules and atoms that are going to create new bonds, but all of them are the same in terms of the mitochondria. And so what matters to you is that you're eating it in such a way that the mitochondria is optimized, which is what we're doing with our macros, because we are eating a high protein diet. Most of you are on a carnivore diet, but those of you who are not on the carnivore diet are still eating a high protein diet and also eating some carbs and eating fat. One more thing that I wanted to say about this, which is very important, which is called the Randall cycle, that is the biological name, is that because fat and carbohydrates both are basically energy, you can use one or the other, but you can't use both. And so there are systems in our body where if you eat carbohydrate, for example, your fat burning ability is turned off. Because carbohydrate is so dangerous for our body, and not only because it creates a lot of oxidative damage and heat, but also because, of course, increased blood glucose is toxic to all of our cells and our nerves, and it causes a host of diseases and inflammation. But also because of this, we have to use glucose first. So if you eat carbohydrate with fat, then your body is going to choose burning the glucose and is going to store the fat. And so if you're gaining weight, which was a topic that I was going to discuss also, part of the problem of gaining weight is that your body is choosing between using glucose or fat as fuel. And there is, of course, an ability for our body to store the nutrients that we eat. Unfortunately, the storage itself is in the shape of fat. Now, eating fat is not going to convert into fat in your body for storage. But if you're eating more fat than your body can use at the time you're eating it, then yes, it is going to convert and is going to be stored as fat. And if you're eating carbohydrates, if you're eating more carbohydrates than your body can use, and your body can really only use very little carbohydrates because we don't really need to eat carbohydrates at all, right? So the glucose that our body can use is very minimal. In the whole entire blood, we only have 1 teaspoon of sugar equivalent. So if you're eating carbohydrate, which we request that on the low carb, high fat diet, on the protocol proper, you eat 50 grams minimum a day, that's a lot of carbohydrates. So if you eat that with a lot of fat, your body is going to retain either the carbohydrates or the fat. Now, if you stay within the limits of what we are giving, then you're going to be fine. But if you're increasing the fat, for example, and you eat the carbohydrates and you reduce the protein and increase the fat instead, thinking that, oh, well, I'm going more ketogenic, well, you're actually going to start gaining weight. So that's not going to work because you're turning with the glucose that you're eating and the carbohydrates, you're turning off your fat burning ability. So fat is going to be stored. If you are increasing your fat too much and you're reducing your carbohydrates too much, then you're going to end up on the ketogenic diet, which at this point is counterproductive in this group because most of you still have migraines, and the ketogenic diet is not a migraine control. It really is a weight control. And so it can be used for migraine to help you, but it's not going to be the element that's going to get you migraine free, okay? To get migraine free, you really need to focus on having the proper sodium potassium balance, salting your waters, and reduce your carbohydrates. The rest of it is all for your metabolic health. And so in terms of gaining fat and gaining weight, when you're talking about eating, say, carnivore diet, and we tell you to eat a lot and eat to satiety, and sometimes it's just so many calories that you feel that you're overeating. And that's, yes, you are overeating. And at the beginning, you probably will gain weight. But the reason why we are asking you to do this is because the way our body works is a little bit counterintuitive. Hold on. Many of you are probably familiar with CISO or KICO, however we want to say the calories in, calories out system. And so you think that whatever calories you take in, you have to exercise it or take it out to retain your weight. But that's not how the body works because of what I just explained about the different macronutrients behaving slightly differently, even though they're the same exact identical chemical elements, they're going to behave differently. And if you eat too much carbohydrates, then the fat is going to be stored. And if you eat less carbohydrates, the fat is going to be used. And so the body has a way of measuring and monitoring the amount of nutrients coming in. So if you are in a war and you all the time are starving, then if you suddenly find a potato and you eat it, your body is not going to use all that energy because it's going to store it. It is now optimized to survive on a starvation level diet. And it's going to take that potato and probably 80% of it is going to store as fat because it has learned to reduce your metabolic speed during the war to so low that you use very little energy for your body function. So you basically stop all cellular replacement, all growth, all development. For example, your blood cells no more live to be 10 days and then they get to be, or 3 months, I'm sorry, and they get to be recycled after 3 months. Maybe if you're in a war, they may perhaps live for 4 months or maybe for 5 months. So your cells are going to be living longer, but they're going to be damaged and they're going to be less optimal. And so your metabolic speed is going to be dropping significantly. And your body is not going to be spending the energy that you just took in to grow muscles, for example, because that's a very energy requiring process, but rather it's going to keep your heart running and your lung functioning and your brain working. And so because of the allotment of the nutrients that you're taking in, it's going to differ based on what nutrients that you're eating. It matters what you're eating, but it really matters less how much you're eating because your body is going to decide what it's going to do with it and under what condition. And again, if you're in a starvation situation, eating a little bit more than what you're used to is going to increase your weight. But when you're in a very healthy situation and your body is used to eating plenty, then it is a more optimized body. And it's going to then use much of the energy that you took in for replacing your cells. The red blood cells maybe have a faster turnover. Maybe some of your cells were not optimal and your body can find it and now say, okay, I'm going to replace those cells that are not optimal. So this is autophagy when your body is taking cells and replacing them. And maybe some growth and development if you're young enough to still grow and develop. And so when we're looking at the nutrients that we eat, it appears that your body is going to change your metabolic speed based on how much nutrient you're eating. The less you eat, the lower your metabolic speed, and the fatter you will be if you eat more than what you need, because your metabolic speed is very low and you're not able to burn it and your body is saving it. But if your body is used to you're eating a lot of food, high in nutrients, I'm not talking about the standard American diet, a lot of food with no nutrients. I'm talking about carnivore diet, where you're eating a lot of meat and a lot of fat within the meat, and it gives you a lot of nutrients, and the body is able to optimize your cell, and your metabolic speed is going to increase. And with the increased metabolic speed, then you can eat more and not gain an ounce of weight. In fact, you may lose. And so weight gain is a little bit counterintuitive because most everybody thinks it has something to do with how much you eat, but actually it isn't how much you eat today, but it's how much you have been eating over time and how well your body is adapted to and what kind of metabolic speed given what you ate, okay? And so what you're going to see, for example, people who go on a plant-based diet, initially they lose a lot of weight. And they do that because their body was used to eating some nutrients. And so they're coming into the plant-based diet with a higher metabolic speed. But then when they eat the plant-based diet, because it is so weak in nutrients. It has a lot of carbohydrates and a lot of fiber and a lot of water in it, but it doesn't really have enough nutrients in it. It lacks vitamins, it lacks protein, and it certainly lacks fat. If you're eating a lot of plants, after a while, your body is going to say, I don't have enough nutrients. I have a lot of fuel for energy, and I have a lot of fiber for my gut flora, but I don't have enough nutrients to replace my cells, to improve the structure, to optimize. And so the cells, the body is going to slow your metabolic speed. And so what you're going to see, and what you do see, is that people on long-term plant-based diet tend to become heavier in weight over time. And this is the reason why their metabolic speed literally reduces to be very, very slow. And so they become unhealthy as a result as well. And a lot of inflammation in the body, because the body simply can't fix itself. So the benefit of the carnivore diet is not just that you're not eating carbohydrates because they're bad for you, but because with the carnivore diet, you have increased the level of nutrients in your body to the point that your body gets optimized and all inflammation is reduced, and everything basically that would be a problem for your body disappears. Okay. And so when we're talking about nutrients in the carnivore diet, for example, we talk about vitamin C, that maybe meat doesn't have enough vitamin C. Well, meat has enough vitamin C if you're eating a carnivore diet, because you don't really need to have antioxidants at that same level from meat eating as you do from carbs eating, because as I mentioned earlier, eating carbohydrates is a very heated process and it creates a lot of oxidative damage, whereas eating meat is not, or fat is not. It's not the same kind of a damage. And so you don't have the need for so much antioxidants, and you don't actually want to have that much antioxidants because, as I explained, basically oxygen or oxidative damage is part of our immune function. So you want to keep some of it going. So you don't have to supplement C. You can, but you don't have to, and you don't need to, even if you use carnivore diet. B1 is really only available to us in animal products, and unfortunately not in a very high percent. And it's not available in plants nearly at all. And so it is an essential nutrient, and that is why we're all taking it, because it is a cofactor for many of our enzymes, and it helps our mitochondria. It also helps in the synthesis of our DNA, which is a very important function. So the more thiamine you have in your body and you're strong, you're going to have higher quality production of your DNA, cellular replacement, etc. B12, we don't recommend for everyone, but those who need it, it helps also not just to regulate red blood cells and the amount of hemoglobin in the red blood cells, but also it helps make DNA. Again, genetics. B9, again, it too helps with DNA. It also has very important roles in the brain. And B9 and B12 you can't find in plants at all. It's 100% animal product only. But B9 you can find in plants, but it's not bioavailable. It is more bioavailable in an animal form. Then, of course, vitamin A. There has been a lot of discussion on Twitter where I have an account on vitamin A. And so vitamin A is a fat-soluble vitamin. It's available from plants in a different form, which is a precursor. And most of us can't convert vitamin A from beta carotene, which is a plant form, into retinol, which is the animal form. I know I can't. From age 1 on, I had to be on vitamin A as a result of that. So it's a genetic, whether you can or you can, and how much you can. And it has a lot of functions with the eye, with the lungs. The reason why you can see, for example, color in your eye properly, it has something to do with the vitamin A. But also vitamin A is participating in whether you burn or you don't. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the chemical connections of suntan and what you eat. And in this case, I wanted to talk about D3, vitamin A, and cholesterol a little bit. So first of all, what is a tan? A suntan, is basically the sun irritating the skin by ultraviolet light, and we have ultraviolet A and B. And the light itself, this ultraviolet light itself, is going to be using the cholesterol in our cells and the skin. Note the word cholesterol. Plant-based have no cholesterol. So you need to, in order to be healthy and have healthy tan, you need to have cholesterol in your skin, and you need to have, therefore, animal products that you're eating. Plus, you need to have vitamin A in order to create melanin, because melanin is what's actually making you tan. And the cholesterol from the sun is converting into D3. That's the vitamin D that many of our members are low in. And this vitamin D3 is the one that actually helps the melanin convert into a suntan. And the suntan's function is to protect us against the ultraviolet rays of the sun. See what I mean? So if you're on an animal-based diet, you don't eat any plant oils, and this is really important because you really want to have animal oils. You want to have animal fat, cholesterol, vitamin A, and vitamin D3. These are all in animal products only for you, and they're fat soluble. And because they're fat soluble, they have to be carried in your cholesterol. That's the LDL. So don't listen to your doctors about having high cholesterol. There's no such a thing as high cholesterol, okay? Because these fat soluble vitamins are all carried in your cholesterol, and they must be in your skin in order for you to get a suntan. So look at me, I'm tanned, and I have not worn suntan lotion at all. And all my walks are usually high noon in the highest of sun time, provided we have the sun, which lately, which we don't have. But if you have a proper amount of cholesterol in your skin, you eat the proper amount of vitamin A and vitamin D3 in your food, you are going to tan and you're not going to burn. And so I covered now all the subjects that I initially wanted to talk about. And so I'm going to switch over to the two questions that I got, which was ulcerative colitis and hemiplegic migraine. So let me talk a little bit about ulcerative colitis because it's connecting to the nutrition that I have mentioned just a little while ago, and how nutrients work in our body and how our immune system working in our body. So ulcerative colitis basically says ulcerated, which is meaning visibly damaged, and colitis, which is basically the problem associated with the intestinal system, the endothelial wall within the intestinal system, and also the microvilli. The microvilli are they're like little hair-looking things that basically allow the food to pass, but also make certain things get stuck so it can have a better absorption or digestion. And so the cause of ulcerative colitis, if you look online, you're going to see everybody, they don't know the cause of ulcerative colitis. Well, we do know the cause of ulcerative colitis. It is an autoimmune disease. So as an autoimmune disease, what does that mean? An autoimmune disease means is that your immune system is an autopilot reacting to something. So why would the immune system on autopilot react to anything? Well, that's its job. So if, for example, you take a deep breath and you just inhale a bunch of pollen together with the COVID virus, its job is to, let me get on that pollen and COVID virus. So its job is to go immediately activate and attack whatever came into your body that wasn't you, okay? And this part of it is very important because when you're eating foods that are irritants to your body, then your immune system is going to react to that. So sometimes these will come off as allergy. So you may have an allergic reaction to it, or you may have something more evil, which is you don't even know it's happening. It's inside your body, but your immune system is attacking it's trying to attack the food that you ate. But because the food that you ate is connected to your own cells by the time it's able to attack it, it's going to attack your own cells. And so when we're talking about ulcerative colitis, it is basically your immune system attacking your own intestinal walls and your colon walls. And it's creating an ulcer or a physical damage, like a scar that is still maybe bleeding or a hole or some kind of a damage. So we are talking about your own immune system attacking yourself because of what often is referred to as a mistaken identity. It really isn't a mistaken identity because the immune cell can tell self from non-self. The problem is when they connect. The most typical of these connections, the most well-known and the most famous is, of course, gluten, because gluten can connect to our own proteins. Gluten is a protein that is generated from gliadin in our intestinal walls as it moves through. And we are highly allergic to gliadin. It's highly toxic to all humans, whether you're allergic to it or celiac or not. You are being damaged by gliadin. And gliadin is in every single grain, not just glutinous grain, but every single grain, but very specifically from wheat. Gluten is created in a digestive process. And this gluten then sticks to your own proteins. And so in order for your immune system to destroy or try to destroy gluten or gliadin, it has to attack the cells the whole cell is attached to, right? It can only destroy it that way. And so when you're talking about an autoimmune disease, be it ulcerative colitis, be it multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, cancer, whatever condition that you're thinking of that is not a contagious, a commutable disease, that is not a genetic birth defect or an accident, if it's not one of these three, then it's going to be a modern day autoimmune condition that is presenting as a disease. So we think of everything as a disease that is like long-term, but it isn't so. So ulcerative colitis was not started by, it's not an inherited genetic disease. Now, it tends to run in families for two reasons. One, because the genetic predisposition to your sensitivity to get it is genetic. And the other reason is that people in the same families tend to get it because they eat the same things. So if you have a genetic predisposition to something, and then you move away from your family and you change what you eat, there's a good chance you're not going to have the same disease. See what I mean? So in this sense, ulcerative colitis is not genetic at all, but your sensitivity to it may be. And as a migrainer, we all have a genetic predisposition to, for example, carbohydrate intolerance. So we react to carbohydrates a lot stronger than anybody else does. And that's because we have a problem. We have a different genetic setup that is just simply going to react to eating too much carbohydrates. And so with respect to ulcerative colitis, if you're on the carnivore diet in particular, it is unknown whether the damage that you have already created going to fully recover. And it is unknown simply because the whole carnivore diet idea is too new. And so we don't know how much you can recover from that. We know that with the carnivore diet, just about any other modern day disease can at least be put to remission, and most of them can be reversed. But so we don't have enough information yet to know to what degree the ulcerative colitis is going to be recovering, go to remission, or fully 100% recover. We have no idea. But the carnivore diet is going to definitely help you. And so the last question was the hemiplegic migraines to talk a little bit about. So as you all know, in the book, I discuss, and also many times in the group, I discuss that there's no difference between migraines. All migraines are exactly the same thing. They all started by an electrolyte imbalance. And what differentiates them from one another is, of course, the symptoms. And the symptoms are associated with the location where the brain is experiencing an electrolyte outage, so to speak. So it can't start the action potential, which is the voltage potential that it would be creating. So it can't create it, and therefore you end up with a migraine after a host of events. If the region of the brain that is unable to start electricity or electrical potential is in the area, for example, of the occipital cortex. Occipital cortex is connected to the eye directly by the occipital nerve that goes way to the back of the head. If you have a problem somewhere there, then you're going to have an aura migraine. If you're getting a problem in the left side of the brain, right over the ear, just about here, where, for example, the Broca area of the brain is, that is the area, for example, that will allow you to speak. Then you won't be able to speak, you're going to slur. Right behind it is another area that allows you to comprehend what people are telling you. If you can't comprehend what people are telling you, then that's the area that is being affected. If you forget who you are, where you are, then you're going to have the frontal cortex that is going to be affected in certain areas. There's just a host of different kind of symptoms, and all of them are associated with where in the brain the migraine is located. Hemiplegic migraine is at all exactly the same. It's not at all different whatsoever. What differs in hemiplegic migraine is that it's not affecting your general brain, but it's affecting your motor neurons. And those are the ones that are conditioned to run your muscles, such as your heart, your lungs, your limbs. And so it's an older brain region, brain area. It's not associated with any more cognitive tasks, but it basically runs your body kind of an area. And so it is more dangerous as a result of that, because you can even have your heart stop during a migraine. You can have your breathing, one lung may not work, etc. So you can have some serious problems in hemiplegic migraine as a result of the region of the brain that is being affected. And so in the case of hemiplegic migraine, because of the reason of the region of the brain that we're talking about, it's 100% of the times it is extra salt that you need. That is by experience over the past 9 years that we had with many hemiplegic migraineurs. And also, if I'm just thinking what that particular part of the region would be accustomed to, because we are talking about such an old region of the brain that was part of the human life from before we became Homo anything. And because walking, heartbeat, etc., those are just the primary motor neuron functions that act without any of our upper higher cognitive functions. And so nearly all animals have that particular region of the brain. And so it's an older region of the brain, and for sure, we didn't eat any fruits or vegetables whatsoever. It was just about eating whatever we could find, and we may not even have eaten animals per se, but whatever we were eating. And so maybe insects. And so we're talking about that region can only run down if it doesn't have enough sodium. And so for those of you who have hemiplegic migraines, you really need to keep salt with you all the time. I mean, at home, even going from room to room, because it can hit so fast, and you may not have too much of a warning. Most migraineurs will have some symptom like our eye is going to change or something similar. In hemiplegic migraine, you're starting with already one side going down. Your symptoms are tingling and similar. And so if you don't necessarily have the same kind of prodromes as other people have, you have more serious prodromes because of the region of the brain that is being affected. And so you need to have salt with you, even if you go from room to room. Like if you go to a bathroom from your office or from the kitchen, have salt in your pocket. So if you start feeling that you're coming down with hemiplegic migraine, just reach in your pocket, take the salt packet and open it and take it, or take a salt capsule and take it without water, just as it is. And it's going to prevent the hemiplegic migraine. And but otherwise, there's zero difference between migraines. All migraines are the same. What matters is what region of the brain you activate. And it also means that aside from hemiplegic migraines, but in general, any migraineur can have any kind of a migraine. So if you normally have, say, an aura migraine, then you can still have a hemiplegic migraine, or you can have a classic migraine without an aura. If you've never had an aura migraine, but you say you're always a hemiplegic migraine, you can have an aura migraine tomorrow, or you can have a regular migraine tomorrow. You can have all kinds of migraines. I personally had all kinds of migraines. And also, I was just talking to Dr. Cybus about this. He asked me a question on migraine with aura, and I just explained to him that really there's no difference between the migraine with or without aura, because even migraineurs without aura, nearly all of us have some kind of visual disturbance if we discover it. I always have some. I may have a blind spot that is very tiny. I may have 3 or 4 little spots that are not floaters, that don't settle down when I'm blinking. When you blink, the floater will go up and then going to go back down. But if you have some visual disturbance, a blind spot, which represents basically the neurons that are not able to activate as a result of electricity, if you have those, when you blink, they remain in the same spot. They don't move because the neuron in your brain didn't move. And you can have like, I can have like fireworks, all kinds of things. Like without exception, when I go in the sun, I will get what I call the diamond sparkles. It's going to sparkle. It's actually quite beautiful. And so you can tell that my nerves are hyper excited by that. It doesn't necessarily mean that I need to take a salt, but if it keeps on going on for several minutes, I need to take a salt because that means I've been out of electricity, even just from going on the sun to sunbathe a little bit. So I hope that I answered all the questions, and I'm very sorry. I apologize that it wasn't working earlier on Facebook, and I was unable to activate Facebook Live. And I hope that this is going to work. And now I'm going to try to end it.